Today in this video, we are going to uncover the 3 layers that you must leave in order to transform. And this hidden pattern of transformation is found in a story that majority of you probably know, the Abraham story. It's in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. Now, before I even go a little bit deep into why I can see the 3 layers in this story, I want us to understand, I believe we're living in a time where alignment with self, alignment with purpose, alignment with who we're called to be and what we're called to do, alignment with gifts, alignment in our relationships, alignment in career and money is at an all-time low, right? There's so much misalignment. It's to the point where everybody is doing the day-to-day, going to work, you might go to church, you might hang out with friends or hang out with people, but deep down inside, there's a lack of fulfillment in your life because there isn't an understanding of where you are and why you're here and what's preventing you from getting to the next level or the next season in your life. And I love the Abraham story because it reminds me a lot of my journey of the things that I had to leave in order to get to the next stage or the next phase of my life. And so I began to look at the story a little differently, and I saw some things that I said, wait a minute, this story is more than just a relocation, a physical relocation. And oftentimes this story is used to, I guess, paint the picture of him being the father of faith, which is understandable. But there's a lot deeper insights when you understand the Hebrew, when you understand what is really being said behind the English language. And so I have a question for you. I'm gonna pose a question for you because I want you to look at it this way. What if everything that you want is on the other side of what you refuse to leave? Now let's think about that. You see, most people, and I realize this, most people want transformation. Most people want success. Most of us want a better version of ourselves without separating from certain things, without leaving certain things. And as I begin to share with you in the Abraham story, it wasn't so much about his destination that a lot of us focus on, or when we hear somebody teach it, the focus a lot of the times is where he was going. But I'm going to show you in this video the 3 layers of what God was actually telling Abraham, or Abram at the time, to leave in order to become Abraham. God was actually taking Abram through a journey, right, of separating these 3 layers so that he can go within himself and find Abraham. You feel what I'm saying? So God actually began the journey from Abram to Abraham. The journey was about what he must leave behind. So let's talk about it. So in Genesis chapter 12, right, it says that the Lord said to Abraham, right? He said, some translations say, get out or leave your country and your kindred and your father's house. Now, I've read this a million times. And this one time when I read it, I said, wait a minute. When you're telling somebody to leave, if I told you, let's make it practical. If I told you, I need you to leave right now, leave the country now because I have a place for you. Let's say it's a vacation, but I'm not going to tell you what the spot is. And I just told you I need you to leave the country, okay? Because I have a vacation spot for you that you've never seen before, and I just need you to trust me and go. Now, that would be normal, right? Leaving the country is an easy task to understand. But when you read it, God gets specific. He said, leave your country. That makes sense. But But then he goes a little bit further and says, leave your kindred. And it's like, okay, wait a minute now. You're getting a little specific now. And then he goes even a step further. Not even just your kindred. He said to leave your father's house. Now, in my mind, I'm like, hold on. If I'm leaving the country, wouldn't it make sense that I'm leaving my kindred to a degree? Yes. You might think you can bring people with you. Now, we can argue that one. But then he says to leave your father's house. But if I'm leaving the country, wouldn't it make sense that I'm leaving my father's house? So I began to say, I said, well, wait a minute. God is not mentioning these 3 layers for no reason. He's not just trying to be extra. Say, leave your country, leave your kindred, leave your father's house. And so I began to see that there are some principles and some a pattern of transformation that God was beginning to tell Abraham that in order for you to become Abraham, there are certain things that are connected to your current identity that you need to leave in order to become Abraham. You see, right? So this wasn't just about relocation, y'all. This was about identity separation. Now, before I get into those 3, country, kindred, and father's house, and this is why it's so important, I'm a firm believer, that if you want to understand the Bible, if you want to know what the Bible is talking about, at the very least, learn the Hebrew. Learn the ancient Hebrew, the whether it's paleo, you name it. Because the deeper you go down the Hebrew language is the deeper you realize, or the more you realize it takes you outside of Western Christianity. Okay? And this is the issue with a lot of people and the struggle to go beyond what we have been given. Okay? And so when you go a little bit deeper, when God told Abraham to leave, when you look into this word leave or get out, what God was really telling him when he told him to leave, he said the word means to go or to go to yourself. So in other words, God was telling Abraham, I need you, a command, to go towards yourself. Go towards the version that you're meant to be, right? Go towards Abraham. And the way you go towards Abraham is by leaving these 3 layers: country, kindred, and father's house. But the command was to go towards yourself. So the journey was a journey of you, the journey of yourself, the journey of becoming who you were meant to be. So Abraham leaving his country, Abraham leaving his kindred, Abraham leaving his father's house was all for the purpose of becoming himself. And this is why it's a universal, it is a spiritual pattern of transformation that all of us, see, let me explain something to you. All of us are here to become Abraham. Abraham is source within you, potential, heightened, it's realized. That's Abraham. But in order for us to now become a source, become a tree, become a system that allows others or other beings or allows creation to use us as a means, we have to go on the journey to become Abraham. That is the whole point of the story. It's the story of your consciousness and your soul expanding. As Source gives you instructions of what to be and what to do and how to do it, you take the journey. But there's certain things that we come to a certain place where we need to let go and we need to leave. Leave certain things, right? So I've been taking this in. So now let's go a little bit further. So in other words, God was telling Abraham that you are I'm going to give you an image. You are a caterpillar and you've reached a place where you now need to transform into the butterfly. Abraham is the butterfly. Abraham is the caterpillar. And the thing about caterpillars that's very interesting is when they are eating and growing and developing, when they exceed their shell, right? Their old shell. What happens is they shed it. They shed their old shell, and they produce a new shell that is bigger than the previous shell that they outgrew. And so what happens is they remove the old shell, and then they go into this new shell that's actually bigger than the caterpillar. But because the caterpillar is continuously eating, the caterpillar now adjusts its body as it massively grows into the new shell. The caterpillar does this about 4 or 5 times before it goes into the chrysalis. You understand what I'm saying? So Abraham, in other words, has reached a place where he outgrew his shells. And now he needs to take the journey, the chrysalis, to now transform, to change his very being. You understand what I'm saying? To become Abraham. So it's going from the old self, the old identity, the old way of thinking, I'm kind of going ahead of myself, the old environments, all the things that make up the current you. And all the situations that make up the current you have helped you to a degree. But now, in order for you to become the butterfly or Abraham, those things, these 3 layers, no longer can hold the power and potential that you've now become, right? So, why did God do 3 layers? Why did God do 3 layers? Because like I said, he could have just said, Abraham, get out the country because I have a land that I want to show you. But he said, get out the country, get out from your kindred and from your father's house. So clearly, when you study the Hebrew and study the Bible, you know that everything is mentioned for a reason, and it's mentioned for a reason. It's not just there to just be colorful. So then we have to begin to understand what these 3 layers are. And so what God was doing, that each instruction was targeting, watch this, here it is. Each instruction, country, kindred, and father's house, each instruction was targeting a different layer of identity formation. So now the question is, what is country? Country is environment. And we're going to touch that. Kindred is your relationships. We're going to touch that. And your father's house is your internal identity. How you see yourself, what you've inherited. And we're going to get into that. Right? So, in other words, if we were to really break these 3 layers down, I want you to notice something that you probably have never seen before. Each layer goes from external to internal. Country is your environment. That's external. Kindred is your relationships. It's starting to transition deeper, relational. It's starting to transition within, right? Yes, people around you, still an external environment, but it's still touching a deeper part of you. And then father's house is everything that has shaped you, all your inherited beliefs, your inherited thought patterns, everything that you've inherited that makes you who you think you are. That is the father's house. What has groomed the current version of you, right? That is the father's house. So it goes from external to relational to internal. So now let's talk about country, because I want us to see what God was really telling Abraham here. He started off with the first biggest layer. Leave your country. And I'm sure you've heard of many stories, many success stories, many different people, many different areas, that a lot of people left their countries, left their environments, because they knew where they were could no longer handle what they were becoming. So they had to make a decision. Go on YouTube right now. You hear it everywhere that people had to leave jobs, leave careers, leave environments, leave cities, leave whatever they needed to leave, houses, changing houses, whatever the case is, right? Because they knew that whatever they're carrying or whatever they wanted to become or whatever they wanted to do, the environment that they were in was, watch this, reinforcing their old way, right? So country has to do with environment, has to do with system, has to do with culture, it has to do with shaping your thinking, your habits, and your future. So what I want you to catch with this is God is saying, go towards yourself of becoming Abraham by leaving the culture and the system and the surroundings that you come from that have shaped the current version of you. Now, it's not to say that that environment didn't help you, but it has shaped currently where you are. So here's what I want you to understand. I want you to write this down. Environments program identity through repetition, right? So if you're in a constant environment, a system, and a culture that's constantly portraying a certain thing, and you're constantly hearing it, you're constantly seeing it, and it's bombarding your mind every single day, what do you think is going to happen with the way you think? What do you think is going to happen with the habits that you have? What do you think is going to happen with how you see yourself, how you see others, how you see your future, right? Your environment shapes your identity. So the first layer that we have to leave is this culture or the system or the surroundings that have shaped the old self, right? If old things are passed away, and behold, all things are made new, part of the passing away is the old environments have to also pass away in order for our realities to shift, right? How do we expect to tap into a new reality, a new form, if we're still in the same environment that is reinforcing the way we currently think, the way we currently see the world? So essentially, God was telling Abraham, by leaving this country, you're leaving the very culture that has shaped the current version of you. And mind you, the current version of him could have been okay. I'm not saying everything had to be all hell breaking loose per se. But he's reached a place where he cannot become Abraham staying in the current environment that's reinforcing Abraham. I hope y'all are hearing what I'm saying. So in other words, you cannot become who you're called to be while you're staying in what formed you. That environment formed the current Abraham. The environment you're in formed the current you. And you can't become what God is calling you to be. See, I'll give you a situation with me. Same thing happened to me. And that's why I said at the beginning that the Abraham story relates to me so much. I was at a particular ministry, and there was a trajectory of where I was going in the ministry. And eventually I would have become a campus pastor and probably would have been on salary full time. You know what I'm saying? And I was already doing music. I was heavily involved in the music for the church, the main campus there. And I was also the youth minister at the time, and a lot of things were happening. But God said, you need to leave your environment, right? I had a dream that showed me that if I didn't leave my environment, I would never become the Abraham. I would never become who I'm called to be, right? I had to leave the environment that produced that version of me, but could not continue to produce the version of me that I am now and the version of me that I'm going. And if I stayed in that environment, I would not be on this video right now talking to you. This video would not happen. It would not happen. Because the environment that I was in was controlling the version of me that I was, right? And I was beginning to see the Abraham version of me while I was in that current environment that was producing the Abraham version of me. So I had to make a decision. Do I stay in the environment because it looks good, it's comfortable, I would have had a salary, I would have not have had to have a job, I would have been on salary, I would have been on TV, right? A lot of stuff was happening, but it wasn't the environment that was going to finally produce the Abraham version. Likewise with religion. The way that I'm thinking now, and the way that I see life now, and the way that I see the Bible now is not the way I grew up. It's not the modern day mainstream Christianity way of viewing the Bible. I'm far gone past that. But I started off with leaving the environment. I can almost see same thing with Abraham. There's actually other writings that go into detail with Abraham's story, right? But during the time that I was in that environment, I'm trying to help you, right? I was studying, right? Because I was in Bible school at the time. But I was also studying beyond what I was learning in Bible school because I was hungry. I was feeding myself, and I knew there was more. And all this truth was coming out. I was beginning to be awakened while I was in that environment, learning things beyond what was being taught while I was in the environment. And I'm like, whoa, what, right? And so I went through my my own growth pains of learning the truth about the Bible, the truth that has been hidden, or the truth that pastors and leaders refuse to teach because they believe it's heresy or whatever they believe. I was learning all those things, and I was getting to the place where the potential within me was rising, and it could no longer stay in the environment that I was growing in. I was growing in that environment, but it maxed out, right? And it was only producing a certain version of me, and there was a fear and shame and all this kind of stuff that was there. So I had to make a decision. Do I stay or do I go? And of course I left. A long story short, look, I'm here now creating a channel called Alignment Culture, because I realized a lot of the stuff that I had to do, I had to make a decision. Do I want to be in alignment with who I am and what I'm called to be? Or do I want to do things because of what others think I should do or what others say or because it looks good? I'm realizing all the things that I had to stop doing or change around is for this very purpose, to now come on this YouTube channel to help you get in alignment with who you are and what you're meant to be. And producing my authentic voice so that you can hear what I'm saying. You feel what I'm saying? And go on the journey together. And so here's what environment really does. Here's what environment really does. And I've mentioned it already, but I want you to you can write this down or you can kind of see what it is. So environment shapes your thinking. Environment, watch this. Your environment can normalize limitation. As I roll back the time of all the environments I was in, especially in church, limitation was normalized. And I'm not trying to come down on the church, but I, as a pastor now, walking in my calling as a pastor, I have a different view of church, and I refuse to accept certain things that many of us have accepted and allowed. And I'm sure as we come along the journey with me, you'll see how I think concerning spiritual community and all that great stuff. But a lot of the limitations and my wife said this. She said this, and she said that how is it that we can believe that the Red Sea was parted? How can we believe that all these miracles and signs and wonders happen in the Bible, but we can't even believe something as simple as our life changing for the better, and us desire whatever we're desiring to have, that's what we can have. But then we're believing these stories, but we can't even apply those miracles and the power that was being displayed, allowing that power to be displayed in our lives. Limitation after limitation after limitation. I refuse to allow my old self, who thought limitation was normal, I refuse to go back to that old self. I refuse to think that things are not possible. Doesn't the Bible say that, right? All things are possible to those who believe. So if I have a vision, if I see a vision for my life and vision for myself, I must get to the place to understand that there isn't a limitation on the vision that I'm seeing for my life and the vision for your life too, if you know what the vision is. And that's why I'm here to help you. Help you understand what your vision is. Help you understand what your purpose is and who you are and what you're meant to accomplish. Right? And this is why this channel is being created for that purpose. That's why it's called Alignment Culture, so that you have an understanding of who you are, why you're here, and where you're going. In fact, I'm going to put a thing in the description below. What I want you to do is I have what I call the Alignment Reset Guide. So this Alignment Reset Guide is going to help you to understand where you are. And it gives you some principles that I've developed to help you pinpoint exactly where you are in your life. So it's free. It's absolutely free. All you got to do is click the description, click the link in the description below, and fill out your email, and you'll get your free copy, and it'll go into the detail. Okay, I'm probably going to split this up into a second video because, look, I've only touched country, and there's a lot that's coming out. So what does an environment really do? It reinforces habits, right? So like I said, your environment shapes your identity. So it reinforces your habits. Your environment also determines what feels possible, right? Your environment conditions your expectations, and it also influences your standards. So what I want you to take from this is that your environment is training your identity, right? So all the limiting beliefs, all the toxic influences, all the low standards, all the being your comfort zone, all the fear and doubt, all the small thinking, all the old habits are all being conditioned and trained by the environment you're in. So of course, God told Abraham, when he told him to leave your country, he said to leave the environment that is now hindering your beliefs, now is keeping you in the low standard, that's keeping you in the comfort zone, that's keeping you in fear and doubt, that's keeping you in small thinking, that's keeping you in the old habits. You can't become Abraham being in the environment that's still training you to be Abraham. So leave the country. Leave this and go towards that version of yourself that's already inside of you. But you can't become that version of yourself staying in an environment that's still reinforcing your old self. Right? So this is essentially what God was telling Abraham. Leave your country. Now, I have some questions that I want to ask you before I close off this video. And then in the other videos, I'm going to do kindred, and we're going to do Father's house. But I have some questions that I want you to consider. A few questions. So the first one is, what in your environment is keeping you small? Do an inventory. What in your environment is keeping you small? So in other words, you have to ask yourself, because you have to ask the right questions in order to get the right answers. So the first one is, what do you tolerate daily? That's the first question. The second question is, what has become normal to you? Right? So because if something is normal to you, you're not realizing it's normal. But now when you start to ask yourself these questions, you're going to do the work. You're going to do the internal work to start to see what in your environment that you think is normal and it's really not normal. Another question is, what environments are reinforcing your old identity, right? Because there's a shift and a change that is happening in your life. But at the same time, what in your environment is still reinforcing the old self? What in your environment is still reinforcing that caterpillar version that's preventing you from becoming the butterfly? And the last question that I want you to consider is, what are you constantly consuming? Because that is also your environment. That is shaping your thinking, that is shaping the habits, that is shaping the type of action you take, that is shaping the thoughts, that is impacting your emotions. And this is what God was telling Abraham. We focused so much on the destination that we missed what God was telling Abraham to leave. Because Abraham was more or less a wealthy guy. He wasn't poor. You know what I'm saying? He more or less comfortable. I'm not saying he didn't go through nothing, but more or less he had a good establishment. But he had to become a nomad in order to go on the journey of transformation. So these are the questions that I want you to consider. These are the questions that I want you to consider with the environments that you're currently in. And so in the next video, I'm going to be talking about the other two layers. I'm going to talk about the kindred layer, which has to do with relationships. And I'm also going to deal with the father's house layer, which has to do with identity, how you see yourself and what you've inherited through your life's experiences that makes you think who you think you are or how you see yourself currently. Right? So we're going to get deeper. So that's the external level, is the country. And now we're going to go a little bit deeper. So don't forget to click the link in the description below and to get your alignment guide reset, your alignment reset guide, where I begin to give you principles that I've developed over time to get you to understand where you are and give you some tools to even start going on your journey of alignment towards who you're meant to be. Thank you for watching this video. I appreciate you taking the time out to watch this, and I will see you in the next video. All right, peace and love.